All right, great to see everybody here at our main campus. Welcome to you guys that are joining us online. So, as you heard, or maybe you didn't hear, we're starting this new series studying the book of Judges. And so, if you're new with us over the past couple months, you might not know this, but we'll do like topical series, like we'll talk about certain topics and scripture that goes along with certain topics, and then we take opportunities to study through books of the Bible. And so I love both of them, but I really, really love studying through books of the Bible. And so we'll be studying along through Judges, so I'll give you a little heads up of like how you can follow along with this. So a couple different ways. So if you have the Bible app, you can go on the Bible app, and there are devotionals that you can follow along with us in reading in the book of Judges. You can just read along and study with us and be able to ask questions or be prepared to ask questions, or again, just come, be challenged, and then go and dig deeper after that. So I want to give you a little background. Why did I want to do the book of Judges, and why do I think that it's important? So for me, I was looking at the state of the nation, right? So I look around, and I've been doing this for quite a few months, and reading articles and watching news clips and talking to different people, and I see the craziness, right? Like some things that you're reading, you think this cannot actually be possible. Anybody else? Like you're reading, and it's so far out there that we're like, what in the world? How did we ever get that the discussion that we're having today is this, right? Like, I don't know, I understand how it gets there. So what you naturally do is you sit down with people and you talk about, so why is it that everything's so messed up, right? So why is it that if you look at our nation today and it's so messed up, and you'll sit down with people and people have different opinions, right? So you sit down and be like, the reason is because we have a crappy president. That's the reason. I mean, the reason is if you just change the president, everything's going to be good. Or you talk to other people and they're like, well, if you would just change out government officials, it's not just the president, because the president can't do. If you just change out government officials, flip the House, flip the Senate, you're going to be able to do. And or you sit down with people and you say, well, if you just talk about local officials, local leaders, if you just change the people in the school system, get a different superintendent, get a different principal, get a different, right? So everybody's pointing around, everybody comes up with this idea that if somebody else would change, the world would be better, right? That's what we do. But here's my thought, right? You know why we're in the state we're in today? Not because of the president or presidents, not because of the Senate and the House, not because of teachers, not because of principals, not because of superintendents. You know why we're in the state that we're in today? Because of the church. God's people, right? Like, I want us to process this, right? This is what I think. I think for years, Christian people have been distracted from what our role in the world is, and because of that, this is what you get. Right? Like, we've been distracted away from the role of a Christian person and what it needs to be. And because of that, forget about all of the political parties and forget about the influences of the world. God said his people will change the world. That's what he says, right? When my people raise up, when my people humble themselves, when my people get on their knees and pray, when my people do, God says, I'm going to be involved. That's right. Here's my fear. We haven't been involved, and so God's not either. And he's just saying, this is what you ask for. This is what you get. Now, how did we get to that? Because that sounds a little harsh, because everybody's sitting there like, this is really the first study of the book of Judges. Like, this is where we want to go. Here's what I want you to think of. I think we live with this idea, a closer than or a close enough and a better than theory in life, okay? So close enough and better than. I'll give you some examples. So I didn't have the specific example until after first service, but I was reminded that when it comes to cooking food, right, so this idea that you have a recipe, right? And so the recipe is you look at it and so many cups of this and so many things of that and so many like little bit of that. And so, I mean, not like I cook a bunch of food, but like if I'm smoking meat or something or doing, like if it's a cup, it's kind of cup and some and and a bottle and some and a little salt or a little more salt. Or if it's a stick of butter, butter makes everything better, so why not put 2, right? Like, I mean, does it really matter, right? Like that. So Mark Heupel afterwards, he's like, well, do you remember when you invited us over and we came over and you made ham and everybody got a buzz because you put too much bourbon in it? And I'm like, okay, they really didn't get a buzz. I was kidding, but it was to the point where it's like a little bit of bourbon and I was just like, well, I mean, it'll all dissolve off, right? Like it just goes away. The close enough theory. Does that make sense, right? The close enough theory. So when it comes to cooking, here's the thing about cooking. Nobody could eat the ham, right? So it was like terrible and nobody likes it. And you just change it over and you shove it off to the side and you make another thing. It's not that big a deal, right? But as a mechanic, when you're working on something, so any of you guys that are mechanics and you go out and you work on something, whether it's your own stuff or somebody else's stuff, and you go through and you got this big job and you're taking everything apart. And, when I was a mechanic, we all had our little bolt bins, and so I had little magnetized things and you try to organize them all so that when you put it all back together, guess what you're hoping for? There's no bolts left, right? But you got these people, you're doing it and you get to the end of it and you're like, oh, there's 4 or 5 bolts left, but the thing still starts. Who really cares, right? And the idea is, well, they just hand you the bag of bolts and say, well, the next time your car breaks down, bring it in, we'll figure out where it goes, right? Like that idea, right? The concept of there is a complete difference between cooking food, right, and working on a car, right? Like you can just do it over on food. If you leave a bolt out of a car engine, or off of something, at some point, that sucker's breaking down, right? At some point, that thing that you've said is close enough is gonna come back to bite you. Well, I don't think it's really any different in our own Christian faith, right? Like we've come up with ideas. So God would have this idea, okay, right? Like, here's the standard. Anybody, right? Here's the standard. And we look at it and we're like, well, I mean, I'm close to the standard. Isn't that good enough, right? Like, as long as I'm doing something, right, isn't that good enough? So we look at it and we say, you know what? I know God's standard is this, but I'm going to live like this. Isn't it close enough? And I would say many of our lives have been broken because we've lived with the close enough theory, right? Like, we left some bolts out and just assumed that God's going to keep everything together. Anybody? Or the better than, right? This idea, the better than theory, back to this idea. Here's the standard. Here's where you land, which is just a little bit better than this. This makes sense? I'll just give you an example. So these are some better thans that I've heard, right? So some better than statements, okay? So any of you guys that are out there raise kids, you'll get this, right? So you're raising kids, and we want what's best for our children, right? Parents, right? You want whatever you can, you want what's best for your children. And then your children start to make some bad decisions. Any parents that raise kids, right? Your kids start to make some bad decisions. And so then you have a choice, right? And our choice is always our idea of how can we love our kids best, right? Like, what do we do to make decisions to love our kids best? So here's one of the better than theories, right? So my kids have made decisions, that's what I've heard, I'll be sitting in a meeting. My kids have made decisions, Brad, that they're gonna drink alcohol, right? Like, they're gonna drink alcohol and they're gonna get drunk. So you know what I decided? You know what the best thing for them is? That they can just get drunk at my house, right? That's better than them going somewhere else, out on somebody else's property and getting drunk. So I'm just gonna make it like, should you be getting drunk? Should we let it, I don't care the kid's age, I don't even really care, right? Does it make any difference? This isn't an issue of whether somebody's 21 or not. If you're gonna call yourself a Christian, what's the standard? Should you get drunk? No. As a parent, should you be like, well, it's better than, right? I'm gonna open my house up, everybody can come and get hammered at my house, and it just keeps them safe. Is that really better than? But we've accepted it, right? Christian parents who have just accepted, yeah, my kid's going astray, but it's better for him to have sinful activity in my house than it is somewhere else. I've heard this over and over again. Or here's another one, right? So men, right, you're married and you're having this conversation, and here's the conversation. My wife just doesn't put out anymore, right? Like we just never have sex, right? And our marriage is old and she doesn't want to have sex anymore and she has all these excuses and she goes down all these roads and, she doesn't ever want to be with me anymore. And so I've made a decision, right? Guess what my decision is? Mike, you'll love this decision. I now go and view pornography because pornography is better than sleeping with another woman. I have had women that would say, it's better than him sleeping with somebody else. Where's this come from? Where have we made these ideas? Here's what it says. Are you ready? Here's the standard. The sexually immoral will not inherit the kingdom of heaven. When did we decide that you get to lower God's standards and think that it's better than, and somehow God's going to be happy about it? Yes? No? Right? Like we somehow say, these are the things that God has, and if it's close enough or it's better than something else, then we think it's okay. Here's a better concept, maybe this will make more sense. Somebody's coming, and you're talking about being a believer, right? Like this is what it means to be a believer, and this is what it means, and somebody will say, well, at least I'm going to church. I said, okay, wait. Was God's standard ever for you to go to church? God's standard was this. When you give your life to Jesus Christ, are you ready? Your life is no longer yours. Your life is no longer yours. The standard of Christianity is not just showing up for church, but if your life is no longer your own, it's giving yourself to whatever it is that your king is telling you to do. Amen. And just going to church, when did we ever lower the standard that somehow being an on-fire Christian for Jesus Christ was just showing up for church? That's not what it is. But we've looked at it and be like, well, at least we're going to church. No. Why? Why are we in the state that we're in today? Because as Christian people, we've lived with close enough and better than, and you're completely happy with that. That we have made a decision that as long as we're close enough and as long as we're better than, then somehow, like this is so crazy, somehow God is pleased. And I want to tell you, in the study of the book of Judges, here's what you're going to see. This is what's so cool. This is why I love studying history, right? Here's what you're going to see in the book of Judges. The nation of Israel did the same thing, okay? So the nation of Israel made decisions of close enough and better than, and then God said, okay, that's fine. If you want to make a decision of close enough and better than, this is how I respond to people who try to do close enough and better than, right? And so you read it, right? And we read it in a way, this is what's unfortunate about the way that people read Scripture. They're like, well, that happened in the Old Testament. That's not really who God is today. No, it is absolutely who God is today. When you read the Old Testament and the way that God deals with people, his character has not changed. When God says in the book of Judges, when you make a decision to do this, this is what's going to happen to you. We can't look at it and say, well, in the New Testament, once Jesus came, God changed. God did not change at all. History should teach us that by no means should the Christian church and God's people be okay with close enough and better than. And because we are, this is my theory, right? So this is my opinion, okay? So my opinion is this, right? My opinion is that the way that we are today and the things that are going on today is exactly what you asked for. What we get today, what you're living in today, is exactly what you asked for. It's exactly what we ask for, right? Because when we study the book of Judges, so if you have it, you can turn there. So Judges 1, that's where we're going to be. We're going to actually read Judges 2, but we're going to be going through the chapter, and I'll explain everything to it. But let me give you a little bit of a history of the book of Judges, why we're going to study it, what you need to be looking for, and why it's important. Because here's what was happening from the beginning. So here's what God said. Are you ready? So God said that he wanted people to see who he was, right? Because that was a problem. For some people, it was like, how do I know who an invisible God is? How do I understand what he's about? How do I know what he cares about? How do I know what's important, right? People were saying that. So here's what God said, right? God said, I'm going to create a nation. Here's the idea of creating a nation, right? I'm going to create a nation, and I'm going to show you, right? So he's going to say, like, Trevor, here's the idea. You want to know who God is? I'm going to create this nation, and here's what I want you to do. I want you to watch how I deal with this nation, and then you can know who an invisible God is by the way that I treat, handle, love, discipline, do. You can know who God is by the way that I, handle the nation of Israel. Does that make sense? So he goes to Abraham, and he says, hey, Abraham, right, this is what I want to do. I want to start a nation, and he puts all these blessings and all these things, and he says, I want to take you to the promised land, even though you have no idea where the promised land was. He didn't have a map, and he didn't show him, like, it's this many miles away, and you're going to end up here, and this is what's going to be. He just said, there's going to be a promised land. And so what I want you to do is I want to build a nation out of you, and I want you to travel to the promised land. And in the midst of all of that, I'm going to show people in the building of a nation who I really am, right? So he starts the process, right? So he starts the process of saying, I'm going to build this great nation. So he goes down this road and he starts building this great nation, right? And he gives them all these promises, and they're supposed to do all these things. Well, guess what happens, right? So the nation of Israel has all the promises and all the ideas, and they go out, and guess what happens? They make bad decisions. Anybody that's read the Bible? Right? They just make terrible decisions. And when they make terrible decisions, you're going to see this. God doesn't break his covenant with his people. He disciplines his people to get them back on the right path. Right? Right? He disciplines them to get them back on the right path. So they're going through this idea. They're traveling down this road. They're going on this journey. They're meeting with, they're talking about, they're making bad decisions. They're making good decisions. But at the end of the day, God's saying, I'm going to be able to show you, Ethan, who I really am by watching the way that I deal with my people, right? So then he gets to, they're finally there, right? You go through many years worth of, like, here are all these people, and these people were raised up, and they never got to see the promised land. Isn't that weird? Like God said, go to the promised land, and they're making all this journey, and in this journey, they never get to see it, but they're still faithful. That should be a lesson in its own. Yeah, God calls us to be faithful. You might not ever see the end result, but remember, the journey is more important than the end result. Like, that's a whole message in itself, but that's the idea. And so a lot of these people missed it, but they're finally on the edge, and they're walking into the promised land. And as they're walking into the promised land, God's just saying the same thing that he said every single time. Obey me, and I will be with you. Obey me, and I will be with you. Obey me, and I will fight on your side. Obey me, I'm going to be in front of you. Obey me. This is what we see this in Scripture. If God is for us, who can be against us, right? Like, he's just saying it to him. And you know what the crazy thing is? It wasn't just words. God showed him, right? God showed him. When you obey me and I'm on your side, Brendan, nobody can stop you. That's what he says. If I'm on your side, if I'm for you, no one can come against you. And people were telling stories of God being on their side and God showing up and saying, you know what? I had all these people come against me, but I was disobeying God, and it didn't make sense, and God stood before me, and I want to tell you the story of God's faithfulness, right? Like, that's where they were at. And so they all knew this. And so he says, before you go in there, let me remind you of these things. Obedience leads to victory. We tracking? Obedience. Not, right? Close enough or better than. Victory doesn't come because we were close enough or better than. Victory comes because God's people look at what he says and at all cost say, I will obey you. Now that's significant, right? Because in the book of Judges, then he finally gets to this point, and guess what we're gonna see? Any guesses? The nation of Israel, given the full picture, all you have to do is obey. All you have to do is follow my orders. All you have to do is have obedience, and things are gonna go your way. The whole book of Judges is, I was on your side because you were obedient, and then you left me. And when you left me, the nation of Israel gets destroyed, gets hurt. There's tons of collateral damage. Lots of things happen, and God doesn't come back and get on their side till they finally get on their knees and say, you know what, I'll be obedient again, right? I lowered the standard. And I lowered the standard, and God said, I'm not gonna be with you. You can go fight, but I'm not coming with you. You can go out, and everybody thought that they could go fight. This is the story, read it in the Old Testament. They would go out to fight battles, and if the standard was here and they obeyed, they destroyed people that they should have never been able to destroy. When they lowered the bar, and this is your life too, when you lower the bar and you go out and fight the same battles, God will not only not be there, he will oppose you. Are you glad you came today? But I'm gonna show you this. Like, this is in the book of Judges. It's not just, I'm not gonna be with you and I'm gonna sit on the sidelines and watch. Like, nope, I'm gonna oppose you, because the most important thing to me is it's not good enough and better than and all those close enough. It's, I want you to put the standard back here, because this is what it means to be a follower of mine. Right, this is where it goes. So when we study the book of Judges, we have to look at it so that we can learn. Right? Don't try to sit back and be like, oh my gosh, this doesn't even make any sense, and I don't know how we could do, God was so hard on him. That's not the issue at all. God is showing how he works with his people when they are obedient and when they are disobedient. And so here's what we should be looking like. We should look at it and say, we, God's people, if we have lowered the bar and are close enough, how he shows and how he deals with the people there is the same way he's either dealing with you now or will deal with you in the future. Good? Okay? So when we read this is the other part of it. Why is it called the book of Judges? Right? That's an important part. Why is it called the book of Judges? So through all of this time, in their leadership, God was preparing them, because God always told them, you don't need a king. Right? That's what he told the nation of Israel. You don't need a king. Why do you think they don't need a king? Who's their king? Right. At the end of the day, the same thing for us. Like, we don't need a king. We need God, right? We need to put God on the throne, and he should stay on the throne, and that's the way we should live with him on the throne. But anyway, they went against all of those things. Like, they always needed something from a leadership standpoint. So he gets to the place where he points judges, but these judges are not like judges that we have today. So it wasn't like get together, hear your court case, and then this judge was going to weigh out who won or lost. These judges were leaders in the nation of Israel that God raised up, and some of them were awesome, and we're going to look at them, and we're going to see the things that they did. And some of them were awful, right? But the leadership and all of that, because it gets to the end of the book of Judges, and here's what it says. And it's preparing them for what's next. Because they had no king, okay, this is clear at the end of the book of Judges. Because they had no king, men did whatever they saw fit in their eyes. And that's why the nation of Israel plummeted into destruction. I mean, the book of Judges is full of like a lot of, I'll give you a little, heads up, like coming up. It's gory, it's bad. I mean, the stuff that we read about is stuff that you would think is unfathomable, kind of what you're looking at today in our culture. Like, how did it ever get to this place? You see this in the book of Judges. Why? Because men made decisions to do things that were right in their eyes, not on what God told them to do. So get prepared, because this is what we're asking for. Because I said, you know why the world's in the state that it's in today? You know why we in the United States of America are in the state that we're in today? Is because you have done whatever you wanted to do to get whatever you wanted. Like, there was an idea of what you should be doing, but you've made decisions, the church has made decisions, Christians have made decisions to benefit more of themselves than it is the king God. Right? And we're just getting a nation who's ignored the commands that God's put in there and been okay with it, right? So when we look at this, we're going to go to Judges 2, because Judges 1, this is what we see in Judges 1. Judges 1 it's the end of Joshua's life. So Joshua was their leader, so it's the end of Joshua's life. And at the end of Joshua's life, he's saying, these are the things that I told them to do. These are the things that they're not, like when you go into the land, this is an important thing. When you go into the land, get rid of all the people and get rid of all the altars, right? That's what you need to do. So when you try to take it over, don't leave any of those things. When you go into it, you need to occupy it. You need to live with God in the forefront of it. You need to have that as a part of your life. So do that. And then it talks about who fights the wars and who goes in, and some of them do good and some of them do bad. But in Judges 2, we get to the point where they start addressing the issue of, I told you what to do, but you didn't do it. Okay, so Judges 2, starting in verse 1, here's what he says. The angel of the Lord went up to Gilgal, to Bochim, and said, I brought you out of Egypt and led you into the land I swore to give to your ancestors. So he's reminding them of the whole story of Abraham, right? Story of Abraham. They went down the road. They made some bad decisions. They ended up in captivity. God brought them out of Egypt and is bringing them to the land that he swore to his ancestors. And here's what he said. I will never break my covenant with you, which is so important, right? When God makes the decisions in the book of Judges to carry out discipline in his people, it's not to break the covenant, it's to bring him back into an alignment with him. You know why that's important? Because that's what he's doing with you today. He's not trying to write you off, he's just trying to bring you back. Like you wonder why certain discipline's going on in your life today. You wonder why certain things are happening in your life today. It's not to break covenant. It's not that God doesn't love you. It's not that God doesn't want what's best for you. He just knows that discipline is the only thing that's going to bring you back. Right? Like that's the thing that's going to bring you back. And so he says, I'm not here to break the covenant with you. And he said, I will never break the covenant with you. And you shall, this is what he's saying to them, you shall not make a covenant. So he's giving them don't make a covenant with the people of this land, but you shall break down their altars. Yet, this is the big question, yet you have disobeyed me. And he asks the question, right? And I think this is a question we have to address. Why? Why? Right? Why would, think about this. If you were them, I always do this, when we're in a story, you need to put yourself inside of the story. So if you were the nation of Israel and you had seen the things that God has done, like some pretty amazing things, some things probably none of us have seen or ever will see, right? Ways that God intervened that were absolutely amazing, where God said something's gonna happen and it happened, and they could sit there and say, wow, that's incredible. So here's all God does, right? So God tells them, here's all you have to do, okay? All you have to do. All you have to do is walk into a situation, right? All you have to do is to go into the situation, and all you have to do is get all the people out and break down all of their altars. That's all you have to do. And if you do these things, right, this is what's so cool. If you do these things, right, then God is going to be on your side. Right? If you obey me, right? That's what he's trying to tell them. If you knock down all the altars, and if you obey me, and if you do these things, then I'm going to intercede, right? And I'm going to be there on your behalf. And they disobey him. Why? Right? Well, when we ask the question of why they did it, it's the same reason why we do it, okay? Here's the reason why. In my mind, right, everybody has two value systems in their life that tend to never change. You make decisions on prosperity and you make decisions on peace. Those two things. In fact, I said this the other day, somebody was talking about the whole election and who people are voting for and what's going on and why people vote. I said, listen, you know why we're in the state that we're in today? Because Christian people, not other people, Christian people have voted for prosperity and not morality for years. Whether you want to believe that or not, when decisions are made, how can I pay less taxes, make more money, have a better economy, pay less for things, and I don't care if the morality of the country goes into the toilet. Because at the end of the day, as long as I have what I want, get what I want, and be able to take care of myself and have enough money, I don't really care who's up there. Nobody wanted to hear politics, right? I'm just telling you, it's a reality, because I think at the base of everybody is the idea of prosperity and or peace. So I'll just give you an example, okay? Are you ready? So when they were going into it, think about this. So if you were standing on the edge of the promised land, here's the conundrum, right? Or here's the problem. You're gonna occupy a land and there's nobody there to work the land. Okay, so think about it from a farmer's standpoint. You're gonna occupy a land, there are crops there that need to be taken care of, and the crops lead to your prosperity, right? or your well-being, right? So if Brad was sitting there, Brad's a businessman, and this would make complete sense. If Brad is evaluating the situation and he's sitting down with other people and he said, you know what, we got to go into a land. There's nobody to work the land. We're not going to have enough people to work the land. We don't even know what we're doing, right? Like we don't know what their crops are. We don't know how they're taking care of it. So I know what God said. God said, get rid of all the people, which we're going to do, just not all the people, because Brad's a good businessman and good businessmen make money, right? So Brad's going to say, you know what the best way to make money is? We can't get rid of all the people. Man, the business is going to go down the toilet, or we're going to lose money for a couple of years, and we can't do it. So you know what we're going to do? Not kill everybody, but enslave part of them. You know why? Cheap labor, right? What's the number one cost in a business? Labor, right? So I'm going to bring in cheap labor, and they're going to be slaves, and at the end of the day, right, this has got to be close enough because God wouldn't want us to make sure that we prosper, right? Isn't that what we're thinking? Man does what's right in his own eyes. God surely wants us to prosper. I know he said kill them all, but God really, I'm just going to keep a few, and I'm going to keep a few because I want your nation to prosper. Is that any different than us? Come on, right? Like, do we not make decisions in our life today that are based more on prosperity than the things that God tells us to do? Because it's very clear. Like, when it comes to money, like, this is one thing where God's not gray at all, right? There is no like, I wonder what the interpretation is when it comes to God, money, and stuff, right? There is no interpretation difference. None of it is yours. None of it. Nothing belongs to you. If you're a Christian, you have taken everything and said, it's all yours, God, and I'll just use it the way you tell me to use it. It's all yours. When did we ever get a decision on that? Do we get a decision on that? Have we taken over the decisions on those things? Well, God, I know the best way to make money. This is the way I'm going to do and the things I'm going to do, and I'm going to sacrifice things that are right or things that are going to cost. But at the end of the day, God, I'm sure you're happy that I'm making money, but I've sacrificed. Is that the God we serve? If it's not your money and it's not your stuff, when do you get to make the decisions? Am I off? Am I missing it? Right? Like if it's not our stuff, if you're a steward of God's things, when do you get to make a decision when it comes to prosperity? Right? You don't get to make a decision on prosperity. God already told you. You know what he told you? You want to think about prosperity at all? You know what you need to think about? Give till it causes you to have faith, right? Which means you're going to give in a way that you're going to be like, oh no. Right? I mean, isn't this what it says? Giving away. Does God need our money? Could God snap his fingers and get anything done? Does he need our money? No, what he needs is your faith. Give till it causes you to have faith. But we make decisions not to give based upon what? Prosperity. It's going to cost me something. I'm not going to have enough. Is that what he said? It's not what he said. The standard is extreme generosity. Did I lose you? Extreme generosity. But yet we make decisions for what we can afford. And we want to say, but God, honor us. Is that the way it works? But we do the same thing. Like we get on them, like, why didn't you just get rid of all the people? Because we do the same thing. We look out for ourselves when it comes to decisions of prosperity. Here's the other thing, peace, right? Like, nobody usually likes conflict, right? So think of it, you're in the nation of Israel, and you walked in there, okay? And we're going down the same road, and Thaddeus is sitting on the outside, and Thaddeus is sitting with all of the men of the nation of Israel. And here's what Thaddeus knows. You know what? He's sitting in this circle, and Thaddeus knows that if he goes to war to drive out all of those people, the people that are going to be sitting in that room, some of them are going to lose their life. Right? Because it's war. You're going to go to war and you're going to try. So Thaddeus is sitting around with a group of people. Does God really want any of us to die? Like, when you're going to sit in that room, surely a God of love doesn't want anybody to sacrifice their life and die. So we're going to sit around a room and Thaddeus is going to make a decision. You know what the decision Thaddeus is going to make? Wouldn't it make more sense to make peace than it does war? Come on, do things that are right in the eyes of man. Doesn't it make sense to make peace and not make war? Come on, stay with me, doesn't it? It makes complete sense. So Thaddeus is sitting with a group of people, and imagine this. They came out of their meeting, and then they went to all these people that are waiting to hear, what should we do, what should we do? We know that God said we're gonna have to go to war, and we're gonna lose some of our sons, and we're gonna lose some of our fathers. And Thaddeus comes back, and he stands up and says, you know what? You don't have to lose any of your fathers, and you don't have to lose any of your sons, because God's love, and he doesn't want anybody to sacrifice and die. We're just gonna make peace. You know how we're gonna make peace? We're gonna marry their daughters and marry their sons, and we're just gonna have kumbaya. Right? That's what they said. What's the standard? Should you marry anybody outside of the nation of Israel? No. But men make decisions that make sense to keep everybody happy and cost them nothing. Are we any different? We're in the state we're in today in the churches and in America because we've said in the name of God is love, we have made decisions to lower God's standards to here in the name of God loves people, right? And to keep peace with everybody, and that's complete garbage. God's love was setting the standard to begin with. Because I want you to understand something. Every time you take the standard from here and you lower it to here and you say close enough or better than, you're just being God. Who gave you the right to be God and who gave me the right to be God? Right? This isn't up for interpretation, right? This idea that God said, this is what the standard is. This is what sin is. Are we on the same page? This is what sin is. Who gave you the right to say, oh, no law, it's not a sin anymore? Because when we call it a sin, you know what happens in the church? When you call out sin in the church, guess what's happening? Somebody ain't happy. When you look at the Bible and you open it up and say, you know what, right? I love you, but that lifestyle and the things that you're doing and the choices that you're making, that's an absolute sin against God. And if you don't change it, he's going to oppose you. They'll be like, I'll be back every Sunday to hear that. Nobody wants to hear that. Right, Tim? Nobody wants to hear that stuff. Nobody wants to be called out. So we just be like, well, you want to hold hands and sing Kumbaya? Would that be better? Right? Like everybody loves and everything's good and you know there aren't real problems. Just keep hiding your sins, and at the end of the day, if God's opposed you, it's all up to you. Right? Like I don't really care. That's not the way it's supposed to work. Right? Our idea is sin. Like that's just the way that it is. Right? Like if you look at the Bible, sin is sin. This is what it says that it is. And we can walk down the road in love with those people without saying the way to love them is to say it's no longer a sin. Are we tracking? Right? To keep peace. So when we look at it, the first thing that he says to the nation of Israel, obedience is the top priority in all of your life, not prosperity and not peace. In fact, I think he would tell you this. If you obey me, prosperity and peace are up for grabs. Like, I don't know, right? I mean, I don't know. I mean, you might live in constant conflict with the world if you're obedient to God. In fact, I would say that's probably a promise that he gives you. You're gonna live in constant conflict with the world because you're gonna be obedient to God. And I would just say, back to the concept or the idea of, like, listen to me, the idea of prosperity, right? And we always look at it as, well, how can I get enough money? Like, we need to look at a prosperity from the standpoint is that God uses me up while I'm on this earth. That's prosperity. Use me. I mean, I might not have any money or drive the nicest cars and drive pieces of crap, like whatever those things are, but I don't care as long as God's using me up, right? And for the things that he's called me to do. So he says that right from the beginning. Then he goes on and he says this, and I have also said, okay, this is the next part. So here's what he said in the beginning, then he says, I want to go on and say this, and I've also said, I will not drive them out before you. So if you have a Bible, that's really important. Underline it, highlight it if it's on your phone. I'm not going to drive them out for you. This is God speaking to them. They will become traps for you, and their gods will become snares to you. When the angel of the Lord had spoken these things to all the Israelites, the people wept aloud, and they called to the place of Bochim, and they offered sacrifices to the Lord. So he says, right from the beginning, there are two factors that you have got to get right, okay? Here's factor number one. You have to participate if you want to drive the enemy out. You don't get to sit back and hope that the world changes. You don't get that choice. You don't get to sit back, right? Like I'm a firm believer. We have an incredible prayer ministry at Life Church that are praying for the transformation and the changing of the world, but it can't stay in the prayer room. It can't stay in the prayer room. You don't get to pray about something and have no action. You don't get to do that as a Christian. You don't get to sit back and point fingers at and say, God, I hope you intervene in the school. God, I hope you intervene in my work. God, I hope you intervene with my kids. God, I hope you intervene. You don't get that. God says you're participating. And if you're not going to participate, then you're not going to see the miracle. Right? Like, think about this. Do you remember the story in the Bible of the city of Jericho? Any church people? Right. Here's the city of Jericho, and God says, you know what? I'm going to give you that city. Right? And so we could have been easily sit back and we would have thought, God's going to give us that city. Let's just wait for God to deliver. And let's sit back and wait and see the miracle. And all these fighting men are sitting out there like God's going to intervene. He's going to open up the gates and we're just going to walk right in. And you know what he says? This is the weirdest thing. Ken, you know what he says? This is what he says. You're a fighting man and you got a sword on your side. Put your sword down and pick up your trumpet and start marching. What fighting man is putting a sword down, picking up a trumpet, and start marching? How dumb is that? Who was in charge of the war strategy? Right? Right? Wouldn't you think this? Right, Mitchell? Like, isn't this like this the weirdest thing ever? Like, just give me a blade, open up the door. I'm going to go chop some people up. That's what I am. I'm a warrior. But no, here's what you have to do. You're going to have to trust me. Pick up the trumpet, start marching around, and at some point, you're going to blow the trumpet. And you've never blown a trumpet in your life. You're like, I don't want to be in band. Right? But this is what he tells us to do. He's like, if you want to see God's miracle, you know what you need to do? You need to participate. And you need to participate in ways that don't make sense. Right? You need to do what he tells you to do. When he tells you to pick up the trumpet and you're like, I'm not a band player. I don't know what the trumpet is and I don't know what to do. It don't matter. You don't get that choice. Pick up the trumpet, participate in the things that God's going to do, and you're going to see the miracles. Choose to stand on the sidelines and point your fingers at everybody else and blame everybody else for the world not changing, and we're going to be the state that we're in today. Nothing's changing until you pick up your trumpet and start marching. You need to participate, right? And it might be outside of your gifting, and it might be outside of the things that God's called you to do. But at the end of the day, he's telling you to participate. You know the other story, right? At the other story he tells us, right, in the participation is, you remember the parting of the Jordan? So this is right before they enter into the promised land. If you don't, let me just tell you this story real quick. So in the participation part of it, in the parting of the Jordan, so they get to the edge of the Jordan, and the Jordan's at flood stage, and it's the only thing that's standing between them and the promised land, okay? Are you ready for this? So he says, right, here's his plan again. You know how God does it sometimes when there's plans that don't make sense? He says, you guys back there that are carrying the Ark of the Covenant, you guys back there, right? I want you to come to the front. So they come walking up. You know, these are guys that are like, you know, some of the leaders, like, because you can't drop it, because if you drop it and touch it, like it's a bad idea, right? Like you need to hold it the right way and carry it the right way. And so he says, here's what I want you to do. Flood stage, guys that are carrying the Ark of the Covenant, I want you to just walk in that river. Now, think about this. If you're a guy carrying the Ark of the Covenant and it's at flood stage and there's no way you're getting across, what's the first thing going through your mind? Who's the idiot that came up with this plan? Can we build a bridge? Can we wait? Like, there's got to be a better strategy, and this is what I want you to hear. Are you ready? Because there's times where all of us need to participate. Pick up your trumpet, march around. And there are times, listen to me, men, are you ready? And there are times where men need to pick up the Ark of the Covenant and walk in the water because everybody's watching you. Because this is what happened, guys. They had to be brave. Not everybody was brave enough. God knew that. God knew not everybody's going to be brave enough to just be like, put on your swim trunks and jump in, right? He knew he was going to have to pick some brave men some men that were going to be leaders, some men that had seen the work of God, some men that had said, I know who my God is, and some men that were going to say, I'll pick up the ark and I will put the first step in and the next step in, and the first time they stepped in, and then all of a sudden the Jordan River parts, and everybody that's back here, like, I don't know if this is ever going to work, I don't know if it's ever going to be right. There's a God, I'm coming through. Why? Because God anointed leaders to stand up and do what nobody else would do. And when you do it, people are following. He's waiting for you, right? You got to participate. Guys, he's calling you. Women, he's calling you. He needs people who are going to lead the charge, because not everybody has the faith that you do. And you can't sit there and pick apart the people that don't have faith. It's your job to be an example, to show them what it means to be a follower of Christ. You need to participate, right? But again, it's not just in participation. Here's what he says. Not only do I want you to participate, if you don't, this is what he tells you. If you don't participate, and if you don't do what I've told you to do, here's what's going to happen. There will be snares and traps that you're going to fall into, and you're going to be led astray, and you're going to be ended up with a life that gets destroyed. That's what he tells them, right? Now think about this. So Jacqueline Brown had sent me, I don't know, it might have been a week ago, 2 weeks ago, this podcast that talks about these two people, and one person left the medical field. Well, anyway, they're talking about this idea that what we eat is actually killing us, and so we need to eat different. And so the whole podcast is about this idea of, like, we need to eat better, and our food's better, and don't eat processed food, and, you know, like, sugar is gonna give you mental health problems and Alzheimer's and, like, all of this stuff. So I'm listening to this all day. Like, it's 2.5 hours, Deliver and Feed, and then I started it all over because I couldn't believe half of what I listened to, you know, so I'm listening to it again, and this has been the only thing that's going through my mind. So then Ethan and I are working, he's working on his four-wheeler, we go riding, we come in, Sarah and Faith are making food to get ready for Faith's birthday. She's gonna be 16, right? So guess what they're making? Anybody have any ideas? Brownies, right? So here's the deal. So she makes these big pan of brownies. Now, I just had this whole discussion, like, don't eat sugar, and this stuff's gonna kill you, you know, and you gotta, like, be disciplined. And so Sarah's like, I come by, and she makes it, you know, and she's like, I know you're, you know, she didn't say this. This is what I thought. Like, I know you can have just a little, but just a little, right? And so she gives me a little, and I eat it, and I'm like, oh, my word. And again, like, but it's just a little, because I'm gonna be, I'm strong, right? I'm not gonna come back, right? I ain't coming back, right? I just listened to the podcast that said don't eat any sugar, I'm gonna have mental health problems, right? So there ain't no way anybody's tricking me into this, right? You can keep those brownies out there, and you can come all up, and then I'm watching IU in the football game, and I thought, well, you know, I'm just gonna go out and just a little bit, like a little corner, right? Like, yeah. I mean, it's just a little corner that turned into a little row, which turned into half the pan. I actually didn't eat half the pan, but Faith asked me this morning before I brought to church, she's like, who got in the brownies? And I'm like, it wasn't me. But you see what I'm saying, right? Like, this whole idea that somehow you're gonna be strong enough, and somehow you're gonna be able to get through, and somehow you're gonna have enough intestinal fortitude. Right? God says, I know you. You better not keep the brownies on the table. They better be on a lock and key, or you're going to eat the whole pan of them. Now, that's a funny part of it, but really, it's a reality for all of our lives, isn't it? God says there are things that are going to snare you. There are going to be things that are going to entrap you, and you know it, but you choose to not get rid of them. You choose to say, you know what? My phone is a problem, but not as much as a problem as somebody else's. Yes, no, maybe? This is God's standard, right? This is what God's standard is, right? And it's so funny because I'll see this with people. They're like, listen, you need to get off your phone, right? I don't know why you're on your phone all the time. I don't know why you're looking over your kids. I don't know why you do all these things, but we fall into the same trap. Yes? right? Like we get caught up in the same thing, and somehow we think that God says, I need your attention, I need you to not. This is what he says. Listen to me. The eyes are a window into or direct access to what? The soul. Everything that you take through your eyes cannot be put off. It goes to the soul. And what our kids are looking at, what you're looking at, the movies you're watching, the books that you're reading are polluting our soul. And we've just said, well, it's better than, and it's close enough. And that's not true. But you know what the problem is? Can you really get rid of it? You ever seen, this is kind of off the subject, but I was watching TikTok this one time, and you know this, I think a lot of people have seen this. You know the kid that's like super addicted to his game system, and they take the game system and then all of the things, and the dad mows over it all. Yeah. You know, and the kid's out there, like his whole life's over, you know. Here's my question. What do you need to mow over this week? Because there are some things that are completely distracting you. There are some things that you've lowered the bar that are ensnaring you. And you've thought somehow, if I just limit my time, and only you know this, if I limit my time, if I limit my access, if I just tell them don't be on their phone so much, if I just do, somehow, it's gonna be okay. Maybe for some of you. I would say for the majority of us, if the trap is left in your home, it will trap you and it will ensnare you. And the whole people that are like, well, but I need to have those things because I need those things to test me. Well, I don't know, I'll just give you what he says. If your eye causes you to sin, better to gouge it out. So I'm not really sure that he says, like, keep it there as a way to test. I think he says if it's causing you to sin, you ought to pluck the sucker out. Okay? All right, so we got a quarter way through. Worship team, if you guys want to come back up, we'll just keep continuing on. That's how we do this when we do book studies, is that we'll just continue on next week. We'll just keep going down the road. But here's what I want to challenge you with, okay? Are you ready? So this is communion week. So here's what we're supposed to do. All right, so here's the idea behind communion. So the idea of communion is to do a couple things, but one of those things is this. You're supposed to remember. You remember when I said close enough and better than? Like, you know why we can't live there? Because your life was bought at a price. Like, you don't get to make those decisions. If God bought your life, Ernie, you don't get to make the decision of where the bar is set, right? This is where the bar is set because God owns you. God bought you. God paid for you by the death of his son, right? Like he paid for you the death of his son. You don't get to make those decisions. So communion is a reminder because the world tells you all week long and all month long that it is all about you and everything is all about you and that you make all of your decisions about you, and taking communion and why we should do it often as a reminder is never about you, right? Because it's always about him and you're bought at a price. So it's a reminder of that. Here's the other thing that he tells you to do, and take this very seriously, because Paul says, the funny thing is, and I don't want to get into great depths of this, but Paul says, if you don't do this, you might get sick and die. I mean, this is what he says. So he says, evaluate your heart. Okay, I'm going to summarize it because it's a long thing, but he says, evaluate your heart. And if you have things inside of your heart that need to be changed, you need to address them before you come to the communion table. That's what he says, right? He says, if you have issues, right, and this is what I would tell you. So you know how I was talking about, like, what are the things that you've been close enough or better than or lowered the bar on? I think you need to think about that before we come up and take communion together and make a commitment that this week you're going to raise the bar back up and get rid of those things. Those aren't easy decisions. Hear me out. Those aren't easy decisions. In fact, most of those decisions that you're going to make to live this way, because I'll just give you a precursor. Here's what you're going to see with the nation of Israel. You can choose not to make those hard decisions, and God will deal with you in a way to bring you back to him. You're just going to see it. Like in the nation of Israel, you're going to see it. Like you can keep going because God gives you free will. You can do whatever you want to do. But if you call yourself a Christian and you are his and you continue down this road, God will bring you back. I'm trying to save you a lot of hurt and a lot of destruction and a lot of pain. All right, that's what he's trying to say, learning this together. So when he pricks your heart during this time, when we're sitting here processing together, so when he pricks your heart and says, like, these are the things, take them seriously. Come to the place where you make a decision like, I'm not going to ignore that, and it's going to cost me something, and it's going to be difficult, but I'm going to mow it over. I'm going to get rid of it. It's not going to be in my house anymore. For me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. These things aren't going to be present anymore. We're going to take a different direction. We're not going to allow certain things to happen, and we're going to address them. Good? Okay, so let me pray for you before we take communion together. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the opportunity to come and to learn. Lord, we love to be able to process these things together. And Lord, we're praying that we remember that our life was bought at a price, Lord, and that there is a reminder that for each one of us, there's an expectation on the way that we live. Lord, let us learn from the nation of Israel the things not to do and the things to do. Lord, but most of all, make our decisions in life I pray for courage, first of all, to recognize the evil and recognize the sin and be able to do something about it. Lord, and I pray that you give us the courage to do something about it. And Lord, most of all, I pray that you get the glory. Lord, we love you. In your name we pray. Amen.